The sky was bruised with dark clouds as Emily drove through the winding roads of rural Oregon. She had inherited an old Victorian house in Raven Creek from her estranged uncle, a man she barely remembered. The town, small and fog-shrouded, seemed to huddle under the shadows of towering pine forests. Locals whispered of strange happenings near the creek, disappearances, unexplainable sounds, and lights that flickered without source. Emily didn't believe in such tales. She was a rational woman, a journalist, used to debunking myths. But Raven Creek had a certain heaviness that made her stomach churn. As she approached the house, the windows were dark, and the paint peeled like old skin. The gate creaked when she pushed it open. Something about the place felt wrong, as if the house had been waiting for her. Emily unpacked her belongings, ignoring the uneasy feeling gnawing at her. That night, the wind howled through the broken shutters. Around midnight, she awoke to the sound of footsteps on the wooden floors below. Her heart thumped. "Must be the house settling," she muttered. But the footsteps didn't stop. They circled the house. Then came whispers, soft, almost inaudible. She strained to hear, catching fragments of words. "Leave, not safe." Frozen, Emily's eyes darted to the corner of her room, where shadows seemed to gather unnaturally. A tall, dark shape loomed there before vanishing when she blinked. By morning, Emily decided to explore Raven Creek. The townspeople were wary of outsiders. At the diner, she overheard murmurs. "The creek. It's cursed." An old man, eyes cloudy with age, leaned over her table. "You shouldn't be here, miss. Some things don't forgive," he said, tapping the table with a bony finger. Emily tried to press for details, but he only shook his head. "You'll see soon enough. The shadows. They wait for those who linger too long." That night, Emily heard the creek. It wasn't just water, it was a low hum, a rhythm almost like chanting, drawing her outside. She approached the bank. Shapes moved beneath the mist, dark forms just beneath the water's surface. Panic surged through her. She stumbled back, only to find muddy footprints leading toward her house. From the creek, the following days were a nightmare. Lights flickered in rooms with no electricity. Objects moved on their own. Emily woke to find strange symbols carved into the walls, symbols that had not been there before. At night, the shadows were alive, stretching unnaturally, whispering her name. She began to see figures in the forest surrounding her home, tall, faceless silhouettes standing still for hours, vanishing when approached. One evening, she ventured too close and heard the whispers clearly. "Join us. Stay." Emily realized she was not dealing with imagination. Something ancient, malevolent, and patient was at work in Raven Creek. While searching the attic, Emily discovered a leather-bound journal. It belonged to her uncle. The entries were disturbing. He wrote of the shadows that whispered promises of power and wealth but demanded obedience. The final pages were almost illegible. Scrawled with panic, they wait in the creek. They know the name of everyone who enters. Escape is not an option. A sudden draft blew the journal open, revealing a hand-drawn map of the creek and strange markings along its banks. One symbol glowed faintly under her flashlight, as if it had a presence of its own. That night, Emily was awakened by a loud banging at her door. She hesitated, then opened it to see a figure covered in black mist, eyes glowing faintly red. It whispered, "Stay, forever." Panicking, Emily grabbed a fireplace poker, but the figure dissolved before she could strike. The sound of footsteps multiplied around the house, dozens of invisible entities circling her. She barricaded herself in her room, but the whispers were relentless, drilling into her mind, naming fears she had never told anyone. By morning, a chilling realization hit her. Every footprint, every mark of mud from the creek, seemed to form a pattern, a ritual being performed. The shadows were not random. They were preparing something. Emily returned to the creek during the day. The water was unnaturally black, like ink. She noticed bones half buried along the banks. Human remains, some decades old, some freshly buried. In panic, she retraced the steps on the map from her uncle's journal and found a hidden underground chamber. Inside were remnants of rituals, charred candles, symbols carved into the walls, and a large, cracked mirror. As she gazed into it, she saw not her reflection, but a dark figure lurking behind her. She spun around. Nothing. But the mirror showed movement, shadows twisting, almost beckoning her. Desperate, Emily researched local history. She discovered that Raven Creek had been the site of occult ceremonies for centuries. Families had disappeared, their souls believed to be trapped in the creek's shadows. One night, she decided to confront the entity. She carried salt, candles, and the journal. At the creek, the fog thickened, and whispers escalated into wails. Figures emerged from the water, eyes glowing, reaching for her. Using the symbols in her uncle's journal, she traced a circle of protection around herself. The shadows recoiled but did not flee. One whispered her name with a guttural tone. "You cannot leave. We are yours now." Emily realized the only way to, and it was to destroy the source, the underground chamber and the mirror. She returned with gasoline, but the shadows attacked. She barely managed to set the mirror ablaze. The fire roared, the chamber shook, and the whispers turned into screams. The creek boiled with black mist. Emily thought she had failed, but then silence fell. The shadows dissipated into smoke, rising into the night sky, leaving the creek eerily calm. Emily left Raven Creek at dawn. The town appeared normal, yet the locals eyed her with suspicion. She drove away, heart pounding, knowing she had barely escaped. But even miles away, in the rearview mirror, she saw a faint dark shape lingering, watching, waiting. Somewhere in America, the shadows waited for the next curious soul to wander too close to Raven Creek. Lily, a young novelist seeking solitude, drove through the winding roads of Montana, heading toward Hollow Ridge, a small town shrouded in perpetual mist. She had rented a secluded cabin at the edge of a dense forest. The locals greeted her politely, but their eyes held an unsettling wariness. "Some places remember you too well," one old shopkeeper muttered as she paid for supplies. That night, as wind rattled the cabin's shutters, she heard faint whispering from the woods. She tried to ignore it, attributing it to the rustling trees. But the whispers seemed to say her name, soft but unmistakable. Exploring the forest the next day, Lily stumbled upon a peculiar object, a tall, antique mirror standing alone amidst the trees. Its frame was carved with unfamiliar symbols, worn by decades of exposure. When she looked into it, her reflection seemed off, slightly delayed, slightly twisted, with dark, hollow eyes and a mocking smile. By evening, the townsfolk looked at her strangely. One elderly woman finally whispered, "The mirror shows what's forgotten, and it takes what you hide." Lily's nights grew restless. She began seeing shadowy versions of herself in the cabin, figures that moved independently, mimicking her every action but with subtle, terrifying distortions. Objects shifted slightly when she wasn't looking, hiding beneath the floorboards. She discovered a stack of old letters and journals, chronicling previous tenants who had vanished without a trace. Their entries ended abruptly, with words like "the shadow waits," and "it knows everything about you." Her reality blurred with nightmares. Every glance into a mirror brought visions of the dark, twisted figures staring back at her, waiting. Determined to understand, Lily confronted the townsfolk. Eventually, an old man revealed the truth. Hollow Ridge was built over an ancient burial ground, where local tribes had performed rituals to maintain the balance between the living and the dead. Mirrors in the town were believed to act as gates, keeping the spirits trapped. The mirror in the forest was the strongest of them all. The dark figure was no mere reflection. It was an entity that had consumed the souls of the missing, longing to replace her. Time lost all meaning. Lily found herself waking in the cabin at odd hours, objects out of place, whispers echoing from the walls. Her own reflection now moved independently, leaving her isolated and paranoid. One morning, she discovered scratches on her arms, dot letters forming a warning. "You are next." She realized staring at the mirror too long risked her very soul. The previous victims had been absorbed into it, leaving hollow shells behind. With the old man's guidance, Lily attempted a ritual to close the mirror. She arranged candles in a protective circle and chanted the words from the ancient scripts. The shadow appeared taunting, mirroring her every movement with a sinister grin. Hands of smoke reached for her, cold and unrelenting. The ritual caused a violent reaction. The mirror rattled, a black mist spilling from its surface. With a final desperate effort, Lily smashed the mirror with a fallen tree branch. The entity screamed as it dissolved, and silence returned to the forest. She fled Hollow Ridge at dawn, heart pounding, every nerve on edge. But even miles away, in the rearview mirror of her car, she caught a glimpse of her reflection, smiling back at her in the same dark. Holloway. The shadow had followed. It was no longer in the forest. It was in her. The mountains loomed like jagged teeth against the crimson sunset as Claire Matthews drove down the winding road to Black Hollow. She had inherited a cabin from a distant relative, one she had never met. The town was eerily quiet, the streets nearly empty. Windows stared blankly at her like the eyes of the dead. The locals, sparse and wary, greeted her with a tense politeness. An old gas station attendant leaned over the counter, voice trembling. "Be careful at night. The forest doesn't forget." Claire laughed nervously, thinking him superstitious. That night, the wind howled against the cabin's walls, and faint whispers slithered through the trees. She lay awake, eyes wide, hearing the faint sound of footsteps outside her window. But the snow-covered road was empty. Exploring the cabin the next day, Claire discovered a hidden room behind a wall panel. Inside, she found artifacts, old photographs of previous owners with faces scratched out, a journal filled with cryptic writings, and a small wooden box containing a carved figurine of a shadowy figure. The journal detailed strange occurrences, people disappearing into the forest, whispers in the night, reflections in mirrors behaving independently. One line was scrawled repeatedly: "The forest hungers for those who wander alone." That evening, as Claire lit the fireplace, shadows in the room stretched unnaturally, creeping along the walls like living smoke. The whispers grew louder, chanting words she couldn't understand, yet somehow recognized. At midnight, a violent knocking erupted at the door. Claire's heart pounded. When she cautiously opened it, the snow outside was untouched, yet footprints led toward the forest too perfect to be natural. Peering through the window, she saw dark figures moving among the trees, faceless and silent. They stopped when she stared, then melted back into the shadows. She tried calling the sheriff, but the line was dead. Her phone, which had worked hours earlier, now displayed only static. Panic began to gnaw at her sanity. The next morning, Claire ventured into the forest despite her fear. The trees were twisted, gnarled, and impossibly tall. Moss-covered statues of animals, human figures, and unrecognizable shapes dotted the forest floor. She stumbled upon a mirror standing upright in a clearing, its frame carved with symbols she didn't recognize. When she gazed into it, her reflection smiled back a smile that wasn't hers. Her hands moved independently of hers, beckoning her closer. Over the next days, the supernatural occurrences escalated. Shadows followed her everywhere. Objects moved on their own. Whispers repeated her darkest secrets. She woke to find scratches forming words on her skin. "Stay or join us." Nightmares became indistinguishable from reality. Every mirror reflected not her face, but a grotesque version of herself, eyes hollow, smiling wickedly. She began to question her sanity, unsure what was real. Investigating the town's history, Claire learned that Black Hollow was built atop an ancient burial ground. Rituals were performed centuries ago to bind the spirits of the restless dead to mirrors scattered throughout the forest. Each mirror acted as a gateway, feeding the forest with souls of the living. The town had kept this secret for generations. Those who vanished were absorbed into the mirrors, their shadows wandering eternally, waiting for the next visitor. Determined to survive, Claire prepared a protective ritual. Candles were arranged in a circle, salt lined the floor, and she read incantations from the journal she found. The shadows emerged, more numerous and aggressive than ever. Faceless figures reached for her, whispering her name in a chorus of voices. Her own reflection in the mirrors outside the circle twisted and writhed, trying to escape the glass to consume her. Claire's mind began to fracture. She saw herself committing terrible acts in visions, harming strangers, screaming in terror, laughing maniacally. The forest seemed alive, bending reality, making time loop and stretch. She realized the entity wasn't just a spirit. It was feeding on her fear, growing stronger with every panic-stricken heartbeat. If she didn't act, she would become another shadow trapped in the forest forever. In a desperate move, Claire lured the shadows back to the clearing with the mirror. Chanting loudly, she smashed mirrors and burned the carved figurine. The forest convulsed with screams as the shadows twisted and shrieked, vanishing one by one. The forest grew silent, snow falling gently. Claire collapsed, exhausted but alive. For the first time in days, she felt the weight of fear lift. Claire returned to civilization, believing she had escaped. But as she drove away, exhausted, she glanced at the rearview mirror. Her reflection smirked, hollow eyes staring back at her. One shadow had followed, and now it was inside her. No matter how far she drove, or how many mirrors she avoided, the forest's hunger had found her. The whispers continued in her mind. You belong to us now. Evelyn Clark gripped the steering wheel as the last rays of the main sunset bled into the thick fog. Greyhaven was smaller than she had expected. Nestled between craggy hills and dense, whispering forests, it looked like a town frozen in time. Wooden houses, paint peeling and shutters crooked, lined the main street, and the faint smell of damp pine hung in the air. She had inherited her grandmother's house, an old Victorian structure that had stood for over a century, and sought solitude here to recover from a recent personal tragedy. Yet the town seemed to watch her as she drove through. Windows like dark, unblinking eyes. A single figure waved at her, a man leaning on a cane. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow. And when Evelyn asked for directions, he leaned close and whispered, "Don't look for what's missing. Some things you won't find until it's too late." Unease pricked at the back of her neck. She dismissed it as eccentric small-town superstition. But something about his tone lingered, like smoke she couldn't shake. Her grandmother's house was even more imposing in person. Its towering roof cast shadows over the yard, and the front porch sagged under years of neglect. The moment Evelyn stepped inside, the air felt heavy, almost alive, carrying the faint scent of old wood and something she couldn't name, a metallic tang. Like dried blood, the house creaked and groaned as if awakening from a long slumber. Windows rattled, and the wind whispered through the broken shutters. Evelyn explored room by room, noting the high ceilings, faded wallpaper, and the faintly oppressive feeling that the house had eyes. By nightfall, the wind had picked up into a howl. Evelyn sat by the fireplace, trying to convince herself that the eerie noises, the floorboards creaking, the rustle of unseen movements, were merely the house settling. But then she heard it, faint whispering, soft but insistent, coming from somewhere inside the walls. "Evelyn, you shouldn't be here." She froze, staring into the shadows. They shifted unnaturally, as if they had weight and intent. Her rational mind scrambled for an explanation. Drafts from broken windows? Rodents? But deep down, she knew this was something else. Something waiting. She locked every door and window and lay awake, eyes wide, feeling watched by forces unseen. Outside, the fog thickened, rolling down from the hills and curling around the house like living smoke. Evelyn realized, with a shiver, that she had stepped into a town that remembered more than its history and was about to test whether she could survive its memories. The next morning, Evelyn awoke to a dim, gray light filtering through the cracked shutters. The house seemed quieter than the night before, but the oppressive feeling had not lifted. Every creak of the floorboards made her flinch. Every gust of wind against the windows sounded like whispered laughter. Determined to explore, she moved carefully through the house, checking each room. Most were untouched by time, except for a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. But in the library, she noticed something odd, a slight draft coming from behind a row of bookshelves. Curious, Evelyn pushed the shelves aside and discovered a narrow passageway. The wood paneling hid a small, hidden room. Inside, the air was musty, thick with the scent of aged paper and something far more sinister. Candles had melted long ago, leaving blackened wax pools on the floor. The walls were covered with strange, faded symbols etched deep into the plaster. Some resembled letters, others abstract shapes that seemed to twist when she glanced away. On a small, rickety table lay her grandmother's journals. Evelyn opened the first one, the pages brittle and yellowed. Her grandmother wrote in neat, careful script about her obsession with the hollow, a hidden underground chamber in the forest that she claimed could capture what the mind forgets. According to the journals, the hollow was not just a physical space. It was alive, hungry, and capable of stealing memories, leaving only shadows behind. Evelyn's stomach churned as she read. Passages describing people who had vanished into the forest, never to return, their memories trapped as fuel for the hollow's growth. A small wooden box on the table caught her eye. Inside rested a carved figurine of a shadowy humanoid figure. Its features were so indistinct that it seemed almost amorphous. Yet Evelyn felt its presence weigh heavily on her. Holding it sent a chill through her bones, as if it pulsed with a heartbeat of its own. That night, the house seemed to awaken. Shadows stretched along the walls unnaturally, moving like liquid smoke. The fireplace flickered violently, casting grotesque shapes across the ceiling. Evelyn tried to convince herself it was her imagination. But then came the whispering again, clearer this time, right beside her ear. "Evelyn, we remember you." Her eyes darted across the room. The shadows thickened, pooling near the corners, as if alive. Objects moved, books toppled from shelves, a chair slowly sliding toward her. Panic surged, but she forced herself to breathe. She realized that the house itself was an extension of the hollow's reach. She barricaded herself in her bedroom, placing the journals and figurine. In a circle of candles, she hastily lit. Yet even here, the shadows pressed against the edges of the light. Outside, the wind howled, carrying faint cries of voices she had never heard but somehow recognized, like fragments of lost memories. Evelyn knew one thing. The hollow was not merely a threat. It was patient, cunning, and aware. And now, she was marked. The following morning, Evelyn awoke with a tightness in her chest she couldn't shake. She had barely slept, haunted by the shadows that seemed to linger in the corners of her room. The whispers were gone for now, but their echo remained in her mind. Every creak of the house sounded deliberate, every gust of wind like a warning. Determined to understand what she was dealing with, Evelyn decided to explore the forest surrounding Greyhaven. The trees were dense and ancient, their twisted branches weaving a natural canopy that blocked the morning sun. The fog hung low, curling around the trunks like restless spirits. Each step she took felt heavier, as if the forest itself resisted her intrusion. After walking for nearly an hour, she stumbled upon a clearing she could never have imagined. At its center stood a large, black mirror, freestanding and untouched by time or weather. Its frame was carved with intricate, unfamiliar symbols similar to those in her grandmother's journals, but older, more ominous. The glass reflected her image perfectly, until it didn't. As Evelyn stepped closer, her reflection began to move independently. The mirrored Evelyn tilted her head, smiled, and raised a hand in a gesture she hadn't made. Panic shot through her veins. She wanted to run, but her feet felt rooted to the earth. Then came the whispers, louder now, emanating not from the mirror, but from the fog itself. Asterisk, all that you forget is ours. Come closer. Give us your memories. Evelyn's stomach churned. She remembered fragments of her past she had long buried, childhood fears, secrets she never confessed, regrets she tried to forget. They all surged forward, raw and vivid. And with each remembered thought, the reflection in the mirror grinned wider, as if feeding on her recollections. Desperate, she stumbled back, tripping over roots and rocks. But the forest shifted unnaturally. The trees seemed to reposition themselves, subtly guiding her back toward the mirror. Every attempt to escape brought her closer to the black glass. Finally, she saw it. Beneath the mirror lay an opening, a dark hollow descending into the earth. From it rose whispers, voices overlapping, fragmented, familiar and alien all at once. The voices spoke her name, each one reciting memories she hadn't thought about in decades. She realized with horror that the hollow didn't just exist in the forest that it reached into her mind, feeding on what she had forgotten. The mirror was a gate, and the hollow was patient, waiting for the moment to claim her completely. Gathering every ounce of courage, Evelyn tore herself away and ran back toward the cabin, her breath ragged and heart hammering. Behind her, the fog thickened, the trees twisting as if alive. She didn't look back until she reached the safety of her house, and even then, the image of that hollow pit and the grinning reflection haunted her. That night, the shadows in her bedroom seemed closer than ever. She realized she was no longer just in Greyhaven, but she was tethered to the hollow. And if she didn't act, it would claim her entirely. The following day, Evelyn forced herself to leave the cabin. though her unease made every step feel heavier. The fog clung to Greyhaven like a shroud, muffling sound and distorting shapes. Every house she passed seemed abandoned. Yet sometimes she thought she saw movement in a window, just out of the corner of her eye. She made her way to the town center, hoping to find someone willing to answer her questions. The small diner was nearly empty, save for a few elderly patrons who eyed her warily. Evelyn tried to ask about the forest and the mirror, but the conversation quickly ended with awkward silence or hurried excuses. Finally, she spotted a woman sitting alone in the corner, her hands trembling as she sipped tea. Evelyn approached cautiously. "They call it the Hollow," the woman said without being asked, her voice low and urgent. "It's older than the town, older than any of us. It feeds on what's forgotten. Memories, fears, regrets. It devours them and grows stronger. Those who linger too long disappear, and the world forgets them. Only the Hollow remembers." Evelyn felt her stomach twist. "Disappear? What do you mean?" "The ones it takes," the woman continued, her eyes darting to the window as if expecting shadows to appear. "Their memories are trapped there. They are part of it now. They are remembered, but not alive. It's been happening for generations. Greyhaven itself thrives because of it. The town feeds it. We all live in its shadow." Evelyn's mind reeled. The whispers, the shadows, the mirror, it all made sense now. The Hollow wasn't just a supernatural threat. It was an ancient, sentient presence that manipulated reality and memory, and she had stumbled directly into its path. "And you? Why are you telling me this?" Evelyn asked. "Because you have seen it," the woman said softly. "And now it knows you. The Hollow doesn't forget. Once it marks someone, it waits patiently. It tests you, pushes you toward it, feeds on your fear until you are too weak to resist. Most people never make it out. If you value your mind, your memories, your very self, you must act, and you must be careful. Always careful." Evelyn left the diner with a sense of dread she had never known. Every step back to the cabin felt heavier, every shadow deeper. That night, the house seemed to pulse with life. She could hear whispers not just from the walls, but from the floor, from the attic, even beneath the foundations. She tried to sleep, but her mind replayed the image of the mirror and the hollow pit in the forest. Her reflection in the bedroom mirror didn't match her movements. She saw her own face twist into a grin that wasn't hers, eyes black and hollow. By midnight, Evelyn could no longer deny it. The Hollow was not just in the forest, nor just in Greyhaven. It was reaching into her mind. It was patient, cunning, and alive. And she knew that if she did nothing, she would be next. Sleep had become a distant memory for Evelyn. Each night, the shadows in her bedroom seemed to move with a life of their own, curling along walls and ceilings like living smoke. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind, became a threat. The Hollow had begun reaching into her very thoughts. She woke one night drenched in sweat, convinced she had heard her own name whispered from the closet. Hesitating, she pulled open the door, but nothing was there. Only the shadows, stretching unnaturally in the moonlight. Yet even as she convinced herself it was her imagination, she felt the unmistakable weight of being watched. The next morning, Evelyn found subtle signs of intrusion. Books she had carefully arranged were scattered on the floor, forming patterns she didn't recognize. The carved figurine from the hidden room had shifted its position. Most disturbing of all, a faint whisper echoed in her mind. "You are next, and you cannot hide." Asterisk. By the third night, her nightmares had become indistinguishable from reality. She dreamt of the forest, the mirror, and the Hollow. Yet every time she woke, traces of the dream appeared in her room, muddy footprints on the floorboards, shadows pressed against the walls, and the faint scent of damp earth. The mirrors throughout the house betrayed her. She would glance at her reflection and see someone or something moving independently. Her own face contorted into expressions she had never made. Eyes black and hollow, grinning with a cruel delight. Evelyn tried to keep a journal, documenting the strange occurrences. Each night, she recorded the whispers, the moving objects, the visions of faceless figures lurking in the corners. But the Hollow was clever. Some entries vanished by morning. Pages ripped clean from her notebook, leaving only blank sheets. The culmination came one night, when she awoke to see a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. It was tall, faceless, and pulsating with a darkness that seemed to absorb the very light of the room. It reached toward her, and Evelyn felt a cold pressure pressing against her chest, as if invisible hands were squeezing her heart. She screamed, but no sound emerged. The figure leaned closer, whispering directly into her mind. Asterisk, all that you forget, all that you fear, belongs to us now. Evelyn staggered from the bed, clutching her head, trying to push away the intrusive thoughts. She realized something terrifying. The hollow was not only outside her, it was inside her. Every memory she had tried to bury, every fear she had suppressed, was being siphoned into the entity. She was running out of time. By dawn, she knew she could no longer wait. She had to confront the hollow directly. There was no escaping it by hiding in the cabin, and the forest's pull grew stronger with each passing day. She gathered her grandmother's journals, the carved figurine, candles, and salt, preparing herself for the ritual that might be her only chance at survival. Evelyn stared at the forest beyond the windows, fog curling like fingers among the trees. The hollow waited, patient, hungry, and knowing. And for the first time, she understood. It wasn't just testing her, it was toying with her. That night, Evelyn prepared herself meticulously. She placed candles in a precise circle around the hidden room, scattering salt along the perimeter. The carved figurine rested at the center, facing the doorway like a sentinel. She opened her grandmother's journals, reading aloud the incantations written in the margins, her voice trembling but firm. As the last words left her lips, the house seemed to shudder. Shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting and writhing along the walls. The temperature dropped, and a suffocating pressure filled the room, pressing against Evelyn's chest. The hollow had sensed her defiance. A black mist began to seep from the corners, coalescing into vague, humanoid forms. Faceless figures with hollow eyes emerged from the walls, reaching toward her, whispering her name in a chorus of tortured voices. Evelyn, give yourself to us. You cannot resist. Her own reflection in a cracked mirror on the wall began to move independently, mirroring her every action with grotesque exaggeration. The reflection grinned, teeth too sharp, eyes black as coal, mocking her fear. Evelyn gripped the figurine and stepped toward the center of the circle. Chanting louder, she traced symbols in the air with salt. Drawing protective sigils she barely understood. The figures recoiled at the symbols, but the reflection persisted, grinning wider with each syllable she spoke. The hollow was not merely testing her, it was learning her fears, adapting. The shadows merged and unmerged, forming shapes that twisted into her childhood fears, regrets, and shame. The air was thick with voices, each one claiming a memory, a secret, a fragment of herself. One figure, taller than the rest, separated from the shadows. It mirrored Evelyn exactly, down to the smallest gesture, but its eyes were voids, black holes pulling at her sanity. It lunged, and Evelyn felt her mind stretch, as if the creature tried to pull her into the hollow itself. She screamed the incantation again, louder this time, her voice cracking. Candles flickered violently. The figurine vibrated in her hands, and the shadows shrieked. For a brief, terrifying moment, the reflection mimicked her fear so perfectly that Evelyn questioned which of them was real. Summoning every ounce of courage, she thrust the figurine toward the reflection. A pulse of light erupted, blasting through the room, sending shadows recoiling into the corners. The reflection shrieked, convulsing before shattering into hundreds of black shards that dissolved into smoke. The mist retreated slightly, though not entirely. The hollow's voice lingered, whispering from the edges of her mind. You survive for now, but we remember, we wait. Exhausted, Evelyn collapsed to the floor. The protective circle held, at least for the moment. But she knew one terrifying truth. The hollow was patient, cunning, and eternal. Her first confrontation had bought her time, but it had also proven that the entity was far more powerful than she had imagined. As dawn crept through the fog outside, Evelyn realized she could not face this alone. She needed knowledge, allies, and a plan that would reach beyond the cabin, beyond the town, into the very depths of the hollow itself. The morning after her first confrontation, Evelyn knew she could no longer remain inside the cabin. The hollow's presence was suffocating. The shadows lingered even in daylight, and the whispers gnawed at the edges of her mind. She packed essentials, candles, salt. her grandmother's journals, and the carved figurine, and steeled herself for what she knew she must do: enter the forest and confront the hollow at its source. The fog was thick, almost tangible, curling around her legs like living fingers as she stepped into the forest. Each footfall seemed to echo unnaturally, as if the forest were amplifying her presence. Twisted trees loomed overhead, their branches forming shapes that resembled claws and faces, all watching her. She followed a path her grandmother's journals had marked, a trail of ancient stones, each etched with faint runes. As she progressed, the whispers grew louder, overlapping in a cacophony of voices. Each seemed to call her name, recounting memories she had tried to forget. The first time she had lied to her best friend, the panic of losing her childhood dog, the ache of a forgotten regret. The forest floor began to shift beneath her. Roots twisted into grotesque faces, snarling silently, reaching for her feet. Shadows stretched unnaturally, moving faster than she could comprehend. She stumbled upon a clearing, and at its center, the ground yawned open into a hollow pit, swirling with black mist. The air itself vibrated with whispers, calling, beckoning, and mocking. At the edge of the hollow, she saw mirrors, dozens of them standing upright, reflecting fragments of memories, twisted and warped. Some showed her as a child, some as a terrified adult, others as a grotesque figure she did not recognize. And among them, she saw the shadowy reflection she had faced in the cabin. Grinning and waiting, heart hammering, Evelyn stepped closer. The hollow's voice rose, 1,000 whispers converging into one chilling command. Give yourself, join us. We remember all you try to hide. She raised the figurine, chanting her grandmother's incantation. The mirrors began to shake violently. Shadows poured from the pit, reaching toward her, clawing at her mind, dragging at her memories. She fell to her knees, feeling fragments of her past ripped away. Memories she would never recall again. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she gritted her teeth and continued the ritual. The shadows converged into a massive, faceless entity, the hollow itself. Its body shimmered like liquid darkness, eyes forming and disappearing across its surface. It lunged at her, a wave of pure terror, intent on consuming her entirely. Evelyn screamed the final words of the incantation, hurling the figurine into the center of the pit. A blinding light erupted, cascading through the clearing. The hollow shrieked, convulsing as fragments of black mist dissipated into the air. Mirrors shattered, sending shards flying, each reflecting fleeting glimpses of memories that had been trapped inside. The forest seemed to breathe again, the fog recoiling as if in pain. Evelyn collapsed to the ground, chest heaving, hands trembling. The hollow had been driven back for now, but as she looked at the shattered mirrors, she realized the terrifying truth: the hollow was not gone. It was patient, eternal. It could wait, and it would remember her. After her harrowing encounter at the forest clearing, Evelyn returned to the cabin, but sleep brought no comfort. Every shadow in the room seemed alive, writhing at the edges of her vision. Mirrors reflected not her own face, but twisted, hollow versions of herself, grinning cruelly. The hollow's whispers followed her everywhere, even outside, carried faintly on the wind. Determined to understand the entity she was facing, Evelyn pored over her grandmother's journals once more. Hidden within the margins were notes she hadn't noticed before, written in trembling, almost desperate handwriting. The hollow feeds not merely on the forgotten, but on fear itself. Memories are its sustenance. Dread is its power. The more you resist, the stronger it grows. To confront it, you must accept the shadows within yourself without surrendering them. Only then can the ritual succeed. Evelyn realized the terrifying truth: the hollow was not just an external force. It mirrored her, reflected her fears, and amplified them until she was trapped in a psychic labyrinth. Every memory she feared to face, every regret she tried to bury, was a weapon it wielded against her. That night, she felt its presence more acutely than ever. The house seemed to pulse with anticipation, the shadows curling around her like living tendrils. She walked through the hallways, whispering the incantations aloud, her voice steady but trembling, every syllable a lifeline tethering her to reality. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into forms she recognized, faces from her past, distorted by anguish. A childhood friend she had abandoned, a teacher she had lied to, The faces of strangers whose names she had forgotten all stared at her accusingly. They were not alive, yet their presence was palpable, each one a fragment of the Hollow's power. You cannot escape what you fear. A chorus of voices intoned, echoing in her mind. Evelyn's heart pounded, but she forced herself to breathe. She began the ritual once more, placing candles in a larger circle, salt lines overlapping the previous protective sigils. The figurine rested at the center, carved markings glowing faintly in the candlelight. The Hollow's whispering intensified, blending with screams of the trapped memories, creating a symphony of torment that threatened to fracture her sanity. Her reflection in the mirrors no longer mirrored her at all, it moved independently, mocking her, laughing at her terror. But Evelyn remembered her grandmother's note. She could not fight with fear alone. She had to accept it, confront the shadows within herself without yielding. She closed her eyes, letting the voices wash over her, naming each regret, each forgotten memory, each buried fear aloud. As she spoke them, a strange stillness descended. The shadows faltered, hesitated, as if unsure how to react. Her reflection froze, the twisted grin fading into something almost human. The Hollow shrieked in rage, a sound that reverberated through the forest, the cabin, and even her mind. Evelyn opened her eyes and raised the figurine high, chanting the final words of the incantation. She hurled it into the center of the circle. A blinding pulse of light erupted, knocking her off her feet. The shadows writhed, shrieked, and dissolved into smoke, leaving the house eerily silent. For a moment, Evelyn believed she had won. She had survived, the Hollow driven back, its whispers gone. But deep within, she felt a lingering pulse, subtle yet undeniable. The Hollow had been defeated, temporarily, and yet, she knew, with a shiver that ran to the very marrow of her bones, it would remember, it would wait, and it would return. The following night, Evelyn knew the Hollow was not merely a memory, it was a predator, patient and eternal. The forest outside the cabin seemed to pulse with anticipation, fog curling like serpents around the trees. Every shadow in the house now felt sentient, watching, waiting. She gathered her tools once more: candles, salt, her grandmother's journals, and the carved figurine. Her hands trembled, but her resolve had hardened. She would not allow the Hollow to claim her mind without a fight. Following the journal's instructions, she returned to the clearing in the forest where the Hollow first revealed itself. The black pit waited, surrounded by mirrors reflecting distorted versions of herself and countless others. Shadows surged from its depths, coalescing into a massive, amorphous shape, faceless, yet emanating a consciousness that seemed to stretch into every corner of her mind. The Hollow's voice rose, 1,000 whispers forming a single, chilling command. Come join us. All that you forget belongs to the Hollow now. Evelyn stepped forward, tracing protective symbols in the air with salt. Candles around the clearing flickered and glowed, forming a fragile barrier. The Hollow lunged, shapes twisting into horrific versions of her deepest fears, childhood terror, unspoken regrets, the pain of loss. As it surged toward her, Evelyn closed her eyes. She faced each memory aloud, naming every regret, every secret, every buried fear. The shadows faltered, their writhing shapes freezing as her words cut through the Hollow's power. With a scream of defiance, she hurled the figurine into the center of the pit. Light exploded outward, engulfing the mirrors and shadows. The Hollow shrieked, a sound of rage and despair that echoed through the forest, then fragmented into a million whispers that slowly faded. For a brief moment, the clearing was still. The fog lifted slightly, the air felt lighter, and Evelyn felt the weight of the Hollow's oppression ease. She believed she had survived, that the ritual had worked. Evelyn returned to Greyhaven, exhausted but relieved. The cabin seemed quieter. The mirrors reflected only her own face. She dared to hope she had escaped the Hollow. Days passed, and she tried to resume a normal life. Yet the whispers never fully disappeared. Mirrors in her apartment reflected fleeting shadows. Occasionally, she glimpsed her own reflection twisting, smiling in ways she hadn't done. Then, one evening, she noticed something impossible: fragments of memories she didn't recognize appearing in her mind, events, faces, and fears that weren't hers. She understood the horrifying truth. The hollow had followed her. It was no longer confined to Greyhaven. She realized she had survived physically, but her mind was no longer entirely her own. The hollow had embedded itself in her consciousness, feeding on the fear she had not fully confronted, patient and eternal. It would grow stronger, waiting for the moment to claim her completely. Evelyn stared into a mirror, watching her reflection smile, a grin that was only partially hers. Her own voice whispered in tandem with the hollow's. "We remember you. Forever." She understood at last. Escape was an illusion. The hollow did not just exist in a place. It existed in memory, in fear, in the very mind of anyone who encountered it. Evelyn's struggle had bought her time, but the entity's hunger was eternal. As she stepped away from the mirror, she felt a cold pulse, a reminder that she was no longer entirely herself. Somewhere deep inside, a part of her was already lost, a shadow wandering in the hollow, waiting to remember again. The fog outside her window thickened, curling like living fingers around the building. The hollow had followed, and it would wait, endlessly patient, for the next moment she faltered.